Okay, let's turn to a Bible verse. Let's go to Daniel chapter 8 again. Daniel chapter 8. Let's read verse 9 through 12. Acts chapter 8, verses 9 through 12. Let's go to Freddie. Okay, so when you read these prophecies, who does it sound like? Based on the history we kind of reviewed. Who does it sound like? Justice. Who does it sound like, Justice? Yeah, what's his name? Antiochus the Fourth, right? Epiphanes, okay? Epiphanes or something, yeah, okay? So this is very, very likely a prophecy about him and his persecution and how he desecrated the temple, okay? So as we were saying when we took a break for exercise, because of his sacrilege, the Jews eventually had like an armed resistance led by a priest named Mattathias, and then later he passed down those efforts to his third son, Judas Maccabeus. Okay, Judas Maccabeus. And then they were able to win a lot of these small victories against the Syrians. About 2 years later, there's actually a large army that came to the land of Palestine. And he probably could have crushed all of these guerrilla resistance efforts. But he heard news that Antiochus IV, he died in battle fighting the Parthians. The Parthians are like to the east, okay, to the east. The Parthians. So he heard news that he died there. So Lysias made a compromise with Judas Maccabeus. And the compromise was basically that they would retreat, okay? The Syrians would retreat. And then the Jews were free to worship, okay? So in 164 BC, the December of that year, basically 3 years after the desecration, the Holy Temple was rededicated to God. Okay, it was rededicated to God, and the proper way of sacrifice and all that could be reinstituted. And I think maybe it took like 8 days or something like that. Okay, 7 or 8 days. So that's exactly where the Hanukkah, okay, comes from today. It's called the Feast of Dedication in the Bible, okay, in John 10. But today we know it better as Hanukkah. Hanukkah means dedication, okay? Hanukkah means dedication. Yeah, actually, that reminds me. This is kind of a little bit off topic, but let's go to a verse. Let's go to Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6. Proverbs 22, verse 6. Ethan Lin. Okay. Train up a child in the way he should go. The word train, you can look it up. It's related to the word Hanukkah. I think it's actually, another way to translate that word is dedicate. Okay? That's the mentality, how we train up our children. Okay? You dedicate this child in the way he should go. And when he grows old, he will not depart from it. Right? Okay, so going back to history. This Judas Maccabeus was able to eventually gain complete independence for the Jews. Okay, so after being exiled, after losing their nation to the Babylonians, around 586 BC, this is the first time that they actually gained complete independence. There were no rulers above them. But it only lasted 80 years. They would not have independence again until modern times, 1948, I think, right, when the modern nation of Israel was restored. Okay, so this lasted until 63 BC. Okay, now what does this have to do with the New Testament? Apart from the history, these Maccabean priest princes eventually were called the Sadducees. Okay? That rings a bell, right? Sadducees? Does that ring a bell to you guys? Sadducees? Anybody never heard of Sadducees? Okay. So the Sadducees were from a priestly lineage, from the Maccabeans, They also had a period of time where they ruled before, independently, right? So this kind of group within the Jews were focused more on political power. The Sadducees. Now, there was a group of Hasidians who aided the Maccabeans until the rededication, right? Until 164 BC. But once they saw that they could worship again as before, they withdrew their support for the Maccabeans. Right? Because all they really were focused more on was like that religious purity. Right? They weren't really concerned about political things. They were focused on keeping the tradition, right, passed down from the forefathers. Okay, so this group eventually formed into the party known as the Pharisees. Anybody not know, have never heard the term Pharisees before? Okay, so, when you read the New Testament, the Gospels, you read, imagine that you're completely new to the Bible, right? These terms might seem like they're coming out of nowhere. You don't even see them in the Old Testament. But this is the history of how those groups developed. Okay, the Sadducees and the Pharisees. Any questions on this slide? During the break, I know some people were asking about some of you might be familiar with some apocryphal books called, I think it's with 2 C's. Okay, I don't know how to spell. Okay, but there's I think there's 4 in total. Okay, 4 of these books in a collection of texts called the Apocrypha. Right. I'll cover this a little bit later when we talk about the canonization of the New Testament books. Okay, but when you read 1st and 2nd Maccabees, then you can get some of this history, okay, of what happened. Any questions on this slide? Okay, let's keep going. So, dissensions and infighting between the Sadducees and the Pharisees eventually did lead to a civil war. And that, of course, weakened the whole nation, even though they were independent. So there's a lot of history between the Sadducees and the Pharisees. A lot of bickering and fighting. Okay? And that led to war and that weakened them. So, in 63 BC, there was a Roman general named Pompey. He came into Jerusalem and he took possession of Jerusalem for the Romans. So, Judea, right, the southern part of the land, became subject to the Romans. Okay? And I think at first they didn't really do too much, but in the year 40 BC, they put the Jews under a Idumean chieftain named Herod. Okay, Herod, from a racial point of view, he's a Idumean, okay, which is basically an Edomite. Who were the Edomites again? Isaac. Who were the Edomites again? Yes, Esau's descendants, right? Okay. So they just kind of gave the territory to Herod the Great, and within 3 years, he could subjugate the people, okay, control them. And he ruled as a tyrant. And died in around 4 BC. Take that for reference, okay? So this was the Herod the Great that was informed by the wise men from the east that there was a king of the Jews born. Okay, this is the Herod that was informed. And then I guess he was thinking somebody's going to rival his power, so he had all the male children under 2 killed in Bethlehem. Okay, that's the same Herod. Okay. But before he died, he also started a renovation project of the temple area. People call the temple area the Temple Mount, to try to kind of curry more favor from the Jews. Let's read a verse. Let's go to John 2. Let's go to Mark 13. Yeah, Mark 13. Verse 1. Mark 13, verse 1. Joey. Okay, yeah. There's another verse too. If we go to John, let's see if this is in John. Okay, yeah, John 2:20. John 2:20. Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" Okay. So if you didn't know like about Herod the Great and his renovation project, then you'll be thinking like, hey, in the Old Testament, it didn't take them 46 years to rebuild the temple, right? Zerubbabel, even though there was a delay in the middle, it didn't take them 46 years, right? But this is referring to what Herod did primarily, okay? Yeah. Any questions on this? All right. So after Herod the Great died, his territory was divided among 3 of his sons. These were these were their names. The one that we should probably know a little bit better is the third one, Herod Antipas. He's the Herod mentioned in Luke chapter 3, verse 1. But the others are also mentioned in the Bible. Okay? Because Herod had a pretty large territory. Herod the Great had a pretty large territory. But the Romans divided it up. For Archelaus, who was more in the south, people eventually complained about him. And so he was replaced by 6 AD. He was replaced by 6 AD. And then there was just a series of Roman governors that ruled until 41 AD. Right? So one of them during this time is the famous Pontius Pilate, who was a Roman. Right? He wasn't one of the descendants of Herod. Okay, this Philip guy was like a tetrarch. He's like a sub-ruler, right? Tetrarch is not that prestigious, but he's a ruler. And he rebuilt a city and called it Caesarea Philippi. That's in the north. I think we all that may kind of ring a bell. Do you remember what happened in Caesarea Philippi? Does that ring a bell? Not ringing a bell? Okay. Let's go to Matthew 16. Matthew 16. Let's read verse 13. Matthew 16, verse 13. Ethan Wong. Matthew 16, verse 13. 13. Yep. Okay, please jump to verse 16. Okay, read verse 18. Okay, right. So the famous words where Jesus once again confirmed Peter's name as Peter and saying, "On this rock I will build my church." Okay. That happened in Caesarea Philippi in the north. Okay. Herod Antipas is the one who unlawfully married his half-brother, Herod Philip's wife. Okay, this is a different Philip than the other Philip we just mentioned. Okay. Right, he's the Herod that had John the Baptist beheaded. He's the Herod that's mentioned in most of the Gospels, in the majority content of the Gospels. Okay. Okay, so later, after Jesus was already crucified, there's a Roman emperor named Caligula. He banished Herod Antipas, right, to Lyons in Gaul, which is modern-day France. Okay, so some details we don't really need to know, but basically his domain was given to Herod Agrippa. Okay, there's a Herod Antipas, and then followed by Herod Agrippa. Herod Agrippa is the one who killed the Apostle James, and he was the one who died because of pride, recorded in Acts chapter 12. Okay. Then he had a son named Agrippa II. And that's the Herod to whom Paul pled his case when he was arrested, right, before he went to Rome. So basically in the New Testament, there are 4 Herods to keep track of. You get it? Okay, there's 4. There's Herod the Great, there's Herod Antipas, there's Herod Agrippa I, and Herod Agrippa II. They're not all the same person. You guys know that? Okay? It's not all the same person. Okay, so in terms of like history, I think that's pretty good enough. Anybody have any questions regarding some of this history? I can do my best to answer. If I don't know the answer, I could help to look it up. Right, that's kind of the setting of the New Testament and how it unfolded, right? This is kind of the larger picture of what was going on in the Roman Empire, and I guess previously the Greek Empire. Okay. All right. I'm going to now jump to another section. I'm going to go now to the languages of Palestine in the New Testament period. Okay. So, okay. This is also history. It's more factually based, but I think again good for us to know some of this. Okay, let's turn to a Bible verse. Let's go to John 19. John 19, verse 19. John 19, verse 19. Isaac.
Now Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews.
20.
Then many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin.
Okay. So here it mentions 3 languages. And in English, they translated it as Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Let's talk about these languages. Right. This is the languages of the land during the time. Now, in our NKJV version, it translates verse 20 as Hebrew, okay, as Hebrew. But actually, the word Hebraisti, okay, can also be translated as Aramaic. So we're going to talk about 4 languages now. Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin. Hebrew is the classical language of the Old Testament scriptures. It's the language that the Old Testament was written in. But something to keep in mind is by the time of Jesus, it was actually approaching the status of a dead language for ordinary Jews. People didn't really speak Hebrew on a day-to-day basis. Okay? And this is what Hebrew kind of looks like, at least from a handwritten point of view. Okay? When you go from left to right, you're moving in time, okay, in history, from the oldest to the left to the newest on the right. And when you go from top to bottom, this is the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, from Aleph to Tav, okay? Aleph to Tav. And this is how the writing kind of evolved over time. So this is a artifact that historians found. It's dated to about 700 BC. And this is kind of like what the Hebrew looked like back then. But then fast forward 1,700 years, and this is a manuscript of the Old Testament called the Aleppo Codex. And this is how people wrote Hebrew, okay, copied Hebrew. And Hebrew is read from right to left, from right to left. Okay, so that's the script, right? It's what it looks like. Okay. Related to Hebrew is the language called Aramaic. Aramaic. It's also what they call a Semitic language. Okay, related to the descendants of Shem, right? A Semitic language. And Aramaic was the language that the Jews eventually began to speak, especially starting from the Babylonian exile. So this was the mother tongue of the great majority of Jews during Jesus' time. Okay, during Jesus' time. That's what most Jews would use at home or between parents and children, Aramaic. And Aramaic itself, according to what I've read, there's several dialects. Okay, it looks like they categorize it as Western, even West, so just within Western Aramaic, there are 7 dialects. And then some of them were used within Palestine, okay? And the accent of this Aramaic and the vocabulary would differ. This is just how language works. Language evolves, and every region that uses a language eventually would develop their own kind of vocabulary and speaking style and the way it sounds. Right? Just think about, most of us have some Chinese ancestry. Just think about China and how the different regions, right? So same thing with Aramaic. Let's go to Matthew 26. This is why when Peter was down in Jerusalem, right? Where is Peter from? Where's Peter originally from? Let's ask Wani. Where's Peter originally from? In the land of Israel. You're not sure? Okay. Let's ask Vinny. Where's Peter from? You don't remember? Gabriel? He's from Galilee, right? Where's Galilee? Galilee is in the south Israel or north Israel? Galilee's actually north, okay? Galilee's the north part of Israel, right? So let's read Matthew 26, verse 73. Matthew 26, verse 73. Who's next? Let's go and ask Aris. Okay. This is when Peter denied Jesus 3 times. How could people tell that Peter was a follower of Jesus? Well, they knew that this group was from Galilee. They knew Jesus also was from the Galilee region. And so their Aramaic dialect there was a little bit different than the Aramaic in the south, which is Jerusalem. Okay? Jerusalem is more like in the south. So the people over there were like, hey, you're not from here. You must be one of them. Okay. Can you guys, for those that speak, like, okay, you guys are all English speakers. Can you tell where people come from their speech and vocabulary? Kind of? Huh? I see Shauna nodding. What sticks out to you? People can tell that you are Canadian just when you speak to them? Okay. Vocabulary, yeah. How many of you guys can distinguish the Canadians from among us? Huh? Yeah. Well, it takes a little bit of time, but eventually, yes, some things betray you, including the words out, about, and pasta. I think you guys say pasta, right? And you guys say out as out, about. Sometimes you say against instead of against. Against. Yeah. Like, hey, you're not from here, right? If, how many of you guys speak like Chinese? Okay, many of you speak Chinese, right? How many of you guys can tell kind of where people are from China? Okay, or can you give an example? Okay, if you're from Beijing, he's saying 卷舌, right? Like your mouth, your tongue, it's like very, like, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, and then for Taiwanese, we don't pronounce Chinese very correctly, actually. Yeah, we don't. Like, when we say, in the name of Jesus Christ, we pray. We usually say, 奉主耶稣圣名祷告, right? But actually, if you really want to pronounce the 奉 correctly, it's 奉, more like, it's not ong, it's like like, yeah. Right? So that can betray. Even Taiwanese, Taiwanese, there's regionalisms for Taiwanese too. Like my dad is from Tainan, my mom is from Taichung. And then so sometimes they have different vocabulary for different things too, growing up. Like, how many people speak Taiwanese here? Or, okay, maybe then that's okay. We'll just skip it then. Okay. So, same thing with Aramaic. Okay, Aramaic had different like dialects and accents. That's just how language evolves. In Spanish, some of you speak Spanish. Can you hear? I'm starting to get to the point where I can hear where different speakers come from, right? Okay, so yeah, same thing with Aramaic. Now, Aramaic, it's written in the same script as Hebrew. Okay, in the same script. So there are actually some passages in the Old Testament. On the surface, you might think, oh, it's Hebrew because it's using the Hebrew script. But actually, it is a different language. And you might be thinking, what? But we'll talk about this later, right? Today, English is written in what script? English is written in what script? Latin script, right? So actually a lot of languages today use the Latin script, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, okay? Right? So like English uses this script, right? Spanish uses this script. French uses this script. So many, even Indonesian uses this script, right? Yeah. So a script can really cover a lot of different languages. Okay, so there are 268 verses in the Bible, all in the Old Testament, that are written in Aramaic. Okay, that's just for your information. But there's also some Aramaic in the New Testament, not like whole. It's more like just words here and there. Let's look at some examples. Let's go to Matthew 5:22. Matthew 5:22. Noah.
Matthew 5:22. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council, but whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire.
Yes, okay. So the word Raka here, Raka, is Aramaic. Okay, and this means, what does it mean? I think it means empty-headed or like, yeah, basically like a fool. Yeah, empty-headed. Literally in Aramaic, empty head. That's what my footnote says in NKJV. Okay. Let's go to another example, another famous one. Let's go to Matthew 27. Matthew 27, 46. Matthew 27, verse 46, what Jesus uttered on the cross. Justice.
Verse 46. And about the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, Eli. I don't know how to read this.
Okay, it's okay. It's Aramaic. Yeah, here, just try. Okay.
That is my God, why have you forsaken me?
Okay, yeah, right. So when Jesus was on the cross, even if you go back to the original Greek text, they transliterated the Aramaic into Greek letters. Okay, into Greek letters. The Aramaic, they transliterated into Greek letters so that Greek readers could pronounce it. And here it's transliterated into English or like Roman script for us. And then it was translated for us too. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is Aramaic. Okay? So during the time of Jesus, the Old Testament was read not only in the original Hebrew, but after they would read it in Hebrew, because since it was kind of almost like a dead language to people, kind of like if somebody were to read the Bible in like Latin to everyone, then they would paraphrase it. They would paraphrase it into Aramaic. And they called that a Targum. Okay. Anybody here go to Rutgers? Okay. What's your newspaper called? The Daily Targum, right? I went to Rutgers as well. They call it the Daily Targum. So the Targum, a Targum is basically, why do they call the newspaper the Targum? I think it's suggesting that they're just interpreting, they're paraphrasing the events of the world for you in this newspaper. Okay, to put it into a more palatable and digestible way. Okay, so that's where that term came from. Okay. All right, let's go to the next language. The next language is Greek. And in particular, a Greek called Koine Greek. Koine means common. Koine Greek. This was the language that was widely understood in Palestine, in the land where Jesus was, right? And especially in the north, like the Galilee region, right? The way you can remember Galilee is in the north is because the Sea of Galilee is like where Jesus spent a lot of time, right? This is like the simple map of of Palestine, right? So Israel is like over here. Jerusalem down here. This is the Jordan River. This is, what's this guy? The Dead Sea, right? Yeah. And then this is often called the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so this is the north. So over here in the north, it's kind of bordering other cities like Tyre, right? Like Sidon, I think it's over here. Right? So, and then also when you cross over here, you have this region called the Decapolis, the 10 cities. Those are Greek-speaking towns. So people, especially up here, were Greeks. Even if they were Jews, they were Greek speakers too. And like we mentioned, this was the result of the Seleucid rulers of the past, who had policies to deliberately Hellenize the Jewish population. So it's been like 200 years of this, okay? 200 years. History of the United States is only 200 something years old, right? So kind of like the same. But that's many generations speaking Greek by now. So bilingualism, in terms of like being Greek speaker and an Aramaic speaker, bilingualism was an economic necessity, especially in the north. If you really wanted to have a bigger market. And so they basically say that Greek was the lingua franca of this period. Okay, so lingua franca basically is like this, okay? So you have language number one here, right? So in this case, the Jews spoke Aramaic. But then in the other cities, they also come from their background, right? They're not Greek by blood, so they're speaking something else. And these two cannot communicate directly, right? Language one cannot communicate with language. So they use this, a lingua franca, to communicate with each other and do business. So what does that sound like to you today? What's the lingua franca of the modern age? What's the lingua franca of the modern age? Probably English. Okay, English. There are a lot of people who are not native English speakers, right? They speak this natively. And then on this other part of the world, they speak this natively. But in order to do business, they'll learn English, a lingua franca. Okay? So much like English is today. Right? Okay, and so this is what Greek looks like in terms of its script, the Greek script. Here are the letters, the 24 letters of the Greek alphabet, uppercase and lowercase. Okay, starting with alpha and ending with omega. Okay, I think my time's up. Any questions? We'll go to Latin very quickly tomorrow. Any questions? Okay, so again, this is like, sorry if it's like kind of dry, but hopefully, yeah, it could be a little bit helpful for us to understand the world that Jesus was living in, right, physically speaking. Tomorrow we'll do a little bit more dry stuff, okay? And then we'll go into the content of the Bible, okay? Again, I wanted to split kind of half and half. Yeah. All right, let's bow our heads and pray in silence.